We are live. Did you see that? We're live. I have a guest with me, a special guest. This is Storm. I don't know how helpful she's going to be, but she's going to be very present. Very, very present. So, I had some ideas about explaining mathematics, spirituality, and some energy stuff. First of all, hi, I'm Linc. I show up here on Saturdays or Sundays, doesn't really matter which. And I teach a class on something involving spirituality or magic or metaphysics or whatnot. Teach a class is kind of fungible, call it a lecture if you will, but typically lasts about an hour, and then you can go have punch and cake. So, I want to talk about E equals mc squared. I know pretty much all of you have heard of it. It's the equation that relates the speed of light to mass and energy. It's the equation that makes the cat settle down. Okay, you are now facing that direction. Is that better for you? Good. I'm glad we have that settled. So, E equals mc squared gives you the amount of energy that a measure of mass will produce if exploded. I know that's not constitute a relationship between mass and energy. It's largely its application is for burning things up. How much energy will you get from burning something or exploding something? Well, you find out by using this equation. So, I'm trying to make it very clear that explosions are involved here because I'm going to describe how the equation actually looks, how you can visualize this equation. Yes, you go over there now. So, on one side you have energy. Now on the other side you have mass and you have the speed of light squared. I have that right, correct? Yeah. So, now the speed of light squared, I want to start with that because I want you to be able to imagine it. Imagine that you have a line that is the length of the speed of light. Because if you're squaring something, when you imagine a graph, when you square something, you have a line going one way and a line going the other, and you can draw a square, and then the area of that square equals the value that you have created. One side will be one length of the square, and the other side will be the other length of the square. It will be square shaped, and so they will be the same value. But, you know, if the speed of light was 3, we live in a bozo universe, so the speed of light is 3, then it'll be a square 3 units long and 3 units tall. You'll have a 3-unit square. It'll have a perimeter of 12 because you have 3 times 4, and 3 times 3 is 9, so the area of the square will be 9. So in that case, the speed of light squared is 9. This is much different than it should be, but I don't want to deal with the real number. I'm just giving you a model. Now, what's important about the speed of light being squared is that when you're thinking of how mass and matter and space is all made up, what actually makes up the fabric of the universe, you should think of it as a fabric. And when you think of that fabric, you would think of thread weaving one way, and then you would think of other thread weaving a different way, square to it. So you'd have this thread going this way, this thread going this way, They make a 90-degree angle to each other. That creates fabric. And that would create the fabric of the universe. And yes, it is implied in this equation that the fabric of the universe is two-dimensional. We'll get into that maybe some other time. But in this equation is really only talking about a relationship anyway, and it's trying to make a relationship that you can graph on a two-dimensional graph. I want to point out that this equation is not shaped like what it is used for. This equation was being used for people who were going to be doing very explosive or flammable experiments to be able to measure the force that you could get from certain reactions, to be able to measure matter itself. 1905 is whenever we get E equals mc squared. It's when Einstein gives it to us. And since then, we have been using it to explode very specific amounts of mass to great effect. It tells us how much that mass is going to generate. But the way it tells us is very interesting, because you could say that it gives you the blast radius. So you want to imagine that square. Now we have the speed of light squared. So you can consider maybe just like a square plane, the length and breadth of infinity for all it matters. You're not going to really need that's what you could just go ahead and imagine, just infinite plane. That's the plane of the fabric of reality. Now, the mass is how big something is. It's essentially what it weighs. The thing about the mass is that it's the actual variable part of the equation. The output that you get, the E, will vary depending upon the size of the mass. The speed of light squared is always going to be the same. It's a constant. So you have a bigger or littler mass being applied to an infinite plane. How much of that infinite plane the mass will affect is the amount of energy that the mass will create if it suddenly exploded. No reason. We'll come up with a reason for it to explode. But first, we need to know, if it did explode for some reason that we'll come up with, how much energy will we get out of it? To give you an idea of why we'll be asking this question so much around this time period, scientists are starting to look at the moon like it might be something they could get on. And how do we get up into space? To make them go up real fast. They were thinking about satellites way, way, way before they were actually possible. They were thinking about all sorts of things way before it turned out to be, something that humanity was going to do. So a lot of the science that you have coming around the turn of the 1900s is rocket shaped. It's literal rocket science. And in fact, if you look to whenever rocket science truly takes off, as it were, the main fuel that's being used for rockets is kerosene. Now, the great thing about kerosene, I'm not going to say the great thing about kerosene. The thing about kerosene is that kerosene is basically refined oil. So the oil industry sure gets a lot out of space launches. Because if the rocket fuel formula has changed now, I mean, I'm not surprised, but that's your order. So the thing about kerosene is that it burns much hotter than oil. It makes much, much more of a fire step underneath the rocket. And so it launches you into space immediately into a place of no gravity, into a place where most humans have never been, a questionable, dangerous, and maybe even magical zone by some people's imaginations. And so wouldn't you know, a rocket scientist by the name of Jack Parsons is the one who came up with the formula for rocket fuel, and he was, in fact, a magician. He was a lodge magician. He was a student of Aleister Crowley. Our space program has occult roots from the beginning. It has if you want to go to the nuclear program as well, if you want to go to the bomb program, you're going to find lots of occult roots there. You're going to find, if not occult roots, you're going to find spiritual roots. You're going to find mythology from Greece. You're going to find it from Christian religion. You're going to find it from Judaism. You're going to find it from Hindu. The amount of spirituality, and I believe it is because the type of thinking that you have to do to be able to work in these disciplines is very much a mystical kind of thinking. There's a field called transcendental math, and it's actually kind of it's a type of mathematics, and transcendental math is really about there was this idea that there were these higher concepts that these shapes would bring you to, that this geometry could reveal to you, infinite tessellations, for instance, and that it was like a kind of pure math, a very spiritual, like completely mental sort of pursuit. But the thing is, these shapes actually can lead you to how to build a bomb. Some of the tessellating shapes that are part of like well-known tessellating geometrical art, they ended up becoming the shape of the bomb, because of the way that charges need to be set up in a sphere. There's only so many ways you can do that. You're going to probably use sacred geometry. I say sacred geometry because it's like historical geometry, the stuff like Platonic solids. You can look up how they built Fat Man and Little Boy, and it's, I forget which one it was between Fat Man and Little Boy that had the plutonium in the middle in a way that it like was, the charges were completely set around it in a sphere, but it's the actual shape is actually a sorry, I know that the dodecahedron is the 12-sided die, but this one is the one for the 10-sided die. And the name for it escapes me, of course. But that shape, that's what they used, and it worked. I mean, historically, we know that. It worked, and it generated an amazing amount of force. Now, that force, if you measured it on a grid, you could actually see the E equals mc squared of it. You could see the mass and what it became in that explosion. So the E really tells you how much surface area the explosion would cover. Now, if you were trying to measure energy for spiritual purposes, for launching yourself astrally into space in your etheric body, what do the calculations start to look like? I ask this because I've never really seen people do the math for the energy of spirituality, but we talk about it very often. For instance, we just talk about, like, need to recharge calories after doing a kind of spiritual work. I'm doing channeling now, so I'm going to have to eat afterward. Like I already have made plans for what it is that I'm going to eat. It's like so necessary. But I've never really calculated out, for instance, how long channeling in proportion to how much needs to eat, like how many calories are actually consumed by this work. And I'm not sure exactly how one would measure that, but I think it's something that is worth looking into, because we've been talking about in my household a method for measuring magic, for measuring spiritual ability, the proof in quotations of how does one actually say that psychic activity has occurred or magical activity has occurred. And it's not because we really need or want this in our lives. It's because of any of this in a way that really becomes human knowledge. How do you prove um, that someone is generating spiritual force? And part of the question is, how do you even measure it? If you're going to measure it, then you're going to need formulas, you're going to need equations, you're going to need standards of measurement, you're going to need units of measurement. And um, I'm not really sure if the psychic field has all that yet. Um, Now, there's various things that we could use for shortcuts that we wouldn't really need to invent ourselves. For instance, what about simply using calories to measure force? Because this is all the idea is that this phenomena is all caused by the human body. So if this phenomena is excuse me, get that light off the screen. There we go. If this phenomena is all caused by the human body, then we might as well just use the measurements that take place for the human body and use the standards for the human body, because it's already there and it would be consistent, and then we could use it in conjunction with other things. That would be pretty cool. So one way that things could go. Now, other than amount of effort expended, what else could we really measure to have any kind of proof or evidence of psychic or magic ability? And this is difficult because, for one, there are a range of different psychic and magic abilities, and these psychic and magic abilities, um, because they're so different, how you would measure them and how you would even experiment with them is different. Not only that, but the real difficulty is that most psychics do them differently. It's like if you had 20 different stage magicians all do the same card trick, they'd all do it completely differently. They might use the same trick, but they would give you a completely different story. They'd have totally different pattern. They'd have different gestures, different ways that they went about doing it. They'd all have been taught by different people, so they'd all know different variants. So it's all the same basic thing, but it's all very different whenever you compare the two of them. Now that's all just with the same trick, but when we have stuff like comparing two different tarot readers, we're not always comparing the same trick, in quotations, as it were, because just the method of reading tarot for people is so different in between different people. So there are a lot of phenomena. There are a lot of phenomena that can be. I'm not sure if we can really measure a lot of phenomena. Maybe we should just start by recording them. And then maybe comparing the different recordings to see if anything can be measured across recordings. That would be one idea, is simply doing something like a tarot card a day or a scrying session a day, and then seeing what are the results each time. Then just looking at those journal entries over time and seeing if there's any pattern that arises. So what I'm suggesting is basically just start gathering the data, and then after gathering the data, see if the data itself shows something that we don't already know yet. I think that one of the difficulties here is that the question we're trying to answer is how to build an experiment, how to how to experiment with magic and actually produce a result that can be measured. And I feel like there's a lot of things that we're missing when it comes to this question and this pursuit. I think that a lot of people try to prove that magic works by saying, I'm going to do a spell or summon a spirit to make this effect happen. So if you see this effect happen, that means that whatever I did worked and magic is real. The problem is that that effect can happen, but we don't know why it happened oftentimes. Oftentimes we have no way of knowing why it happened or how it happened. And in the cases of stage magic, you always know that the way that it happened is that the magician set up some sort of illusion to make it seem like it happened, but it didn't really happen the way that you would say it happened in physical reality usually, or the way that the story says it's going to happen. They can say that the pencil is going through the quarter all they want. They can produce that illusion, but you know that something has to be up for it to look like the pencil is going through the quarter, because you know that a pencil can't physically go through an actual quarter. I think stage magic is a good way to start looking at the challenges involving measuring magic, because anything that a stage magician can do is anything that just any human can do to mess up your experiment on magic or psychic ability. And so, for instance, there's been all these different psychic experiments in which you draw a card and guess what the card is and stuff like that. But I'd say that it's vitally important to know if any success rates track with certain candidates, either who are showing the card or who are reading the card, because so many different sleight of hand tricks are possible that it is quite possible that there are a lot of false positives in the old data on card reading stuff. That maybe card reading not a good way to measure psychic ability, because cards can so easily be tampered with. And I say this because I feel that there are a lot of people who genuinely believe in psychic ability, but who also think that science just needs to be pushed over the edge, and it doesn't matter if we falsify the data a little bit to get there. And usually the reason why a lot of scientific hoaxes originate is because someone wanted science to, go forward in this area faster than science wanted to go. And so it's like, okay, fine. Maybe if you have something that seems like it proves this, then you just go ahead and go, and then you'll find the real proof. And it's like, that's not how science works. So it's really very frustrating and very sad to find so many people in the field of spirituality and religion and even self-help who are there to exploit and who are only there to profit off of it. And the thing is, I cannot say that this is a modern affectation. You can find this very, very, very far back. It's I'm not going to call it the human condition, because what if there are aliens out there somewhere in space who have the same problem? It's a condition we go through. It'd be nice if we didn't go through it. So, energy, rockets, spirituality, ether. It is very interesting that so much of our physics is based off of this measurement of energy, because energy in and of itself is a concept from physics. And anytime that you apply it in magic, the question becomes, all right, what do you mean by energy? And I don't mean that to be a problem. I just mean that since it's meant so many different things from so many different people, whenever you start using the term energy or start thinking with the term energy, give yourself a moment to like define what it is that energy means in the case that you're using it at that time. Because it can mean different things at different times. It can mean different things in different applications. We use the same word for all kinds of different things all the time, and we do it just fine. So, I have no problem using the word energy if um, that's what it seems to be the suitable word to use. I don't think that it always needs to be applied to physics, but I think having a good understanding of the physics notion of energy is very good to have because it will help you define any other kind of notion it is that you have about energy. There's going to be one notion of energy that humans have already decided upon when it comes to physics, and you can learn that and have that common root with everybody. And then your divergence will be a lot more understandable according to everybody because you'll be able to relate back to the notion of energy that we all share via physics. When it comes to science, I find that people often have this magic versus science mentality that like magic is just science that hasn't scienced yet, or science is magic that has been proven. But I would really challenge that. You don't need magic to become science. It's just that there are a lot of things in the category of magic that if they behaved a lot more like science, or if we knew more about them, maybe would be able to use them more like science. And that sounds very appealing. And I would welcome that for some things. For other things, I'm not really sure if it would ever really be a useful application. For instance, almost everything about ghosts, I think we can pretty much just not worry about doing anything practical with ghosts. Just leave ghosts to seances and stuff, and leave ghosts alone. Ghosts have it bad enough already. They're already dead. You are not allowed to build rockets that are powered by ghosts. That's the that's the line. By the way, that's not coming from any spiritual plane thing. That's just a thing that I said. So, um, now Reiki is a type of energy work, and energy is spoken of a lot when we talk about Reiki. And I want to talk about Reiki. There's several different cover stories given for Reiki. When I say cover stories, I don't really have a better way of saying it, but basically, there's different authors out there that have different takes on Reiki, and those takes are often based around whether or not you should consider them the expert on Reiki. You don't need to consider me an expert on Reiki. I'm just kind of looking at it all from a distance, being like, okay, so they're saying that this is spiritual energy. And it seems kind of like the force of ki or chi that often you see mentioned in many Eastern spiritualities. Now, this Reiki, the thing about it is that I've often seen it said that Reiki is different than regular energy work in that you're drawing from a universal source of energy that um, is always replenishing and will never dry up and is completely clean, and it's really unstated as to what that is. But let's talk about that. There's a lot of different sources of energy that could be perpetual from humanity's POV. For instance, wave power. The ocean's going to keep going. From our mental POV, the ocean's going to keep going forever. From the universe's POV, the oceans are going to like be a blink of an eye. They're not really going to last that long. But you could easily have ocean power be the source of ki. Geothermal The molten core of the inside of the planet could be a source of that power. It would make a lot of sense. It would be like the power of the Earth, or it could be the power of the sun, because that's there, and it's literally why we're all alive. So, when we talk about Reiki, we can't even really say what the source is, because no one can actually prove it. This is where we talk about proof. How do we prove Reiki beyond a shadow of a doubt? How do we prove it like we prove electricity, like we prove how light is bent with a prism? There's ways that we prove that gravity is a force that we interact with. Whether or not we can fully explain how it works, we can prove that it's doing things. And we do this with experiments. What experiment proves Reiki? The problem with Reiki is that since it's a healing pursuit, usually the answer would be, well, you do some healing on someone, and if the healing works, then Reiki is proven. The problem is that we are again at the impasse of, how do we prove that Reiki was what did it instead of something else, instead of random happenstance, instead of the placebo effect, et cetera, et cetera. And I present this as a mental challenge. Like, how do you prove that? I'm not saying that it's not possible to prove it. I'm saying that I don't think that a lot of people have really applied a lot of scientific rigor to this problem. Examining on the face of it the angles that I'm talking about, specifically that even though you can say that an effect happened, you cannot just say that the cause that you like is the reason why the effect happened. You have to relate the cause and effect together in a way that establishes clear cause and effect, a clear relationship. This is the core of human logic, really, that effect follows cause. Effect does not come before cause. Effect comes after cause. There is a direct temporal relationship. You do this, and this thing happens because of it afterward. The problem with magic and psychic ability is that often we're talking about things that transcend the order of cause and effect. Often we're talking about things that are future knowledge or looking into the past, which means that from the past point of view, you're looking like a future being is interact with them, which transcends cause and effect from the past point of view. You consider all of the logical paradoxes that might be possible, that might be happening because of what action is happening. And like any kind of divination, what if you act different? What about the causality changes? Causality is something that's really, really, really hard to figure out whenever you also consider the concept of free will. If truly free will exists, then there should be many different futures instead of one. There should be lots of branching causalities instead of one cause and effect. There should be a cause and then like all kinds of different possible effects. And here we get one, and here we get another one. So, the logic of cause and effect, it's really difficult to apply to magic and spirituality. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's important to understand alongside magic instead of being the antithesis of magic. Then, like, for instance, miracles are something that typically transcends cause and effect. That something, an effect happens, and the cause is not anything of logic that we know. It's because a god did it. Now, this is again something that we have a lot of trouble with when it comes to interaction between religion and science. There's been a lot of beef in the past because if a religion makes a claim that like a miracle happened and these effects happened because of this cause, if science is applied to that, and science says, no, it looks like it happened because of this scientific reason, then it looks like science is basically disproving God. But that's not really what's happening. It's simply that if we apply logic to the situation, we may discover that the cause was something different than we anticipated or that we understood. Or that a God decided to make the effect happen via the cause that was logical, which, by the way, any God has the option of simply just using physics to do it. And I think pretty much all of them are going to do that. Like, I'm very frustrated that people sort of take the ability from the, I'll just say God, and when I say that God, I could mean any God, but typically this is coming from the Christian POV. This particular criticism, there's this idea that if you have explained the differentiation of species via evolution, then you've taken some sort of power away from God. And if you say that it would have, taken millions of years, then you've taken from God the ability to create the world inside of 3,500 years. And I just don't really see that, because I just figure that God chose to do this over the course of many millions of years because that's how God decided to do it. And since God is so infinite and so immortal and so omniscient, then what's it God to sit around and wait for a few million years until things are how God wants it? And then, bam, life happens. Like, if you have a deity that has such immense capabilities, almost infinite capabilities, then you can't limit that deity's ability to create a universe behind whatever it is that deity wants to do. If the deity truly has phenomenal cosmic power, then you can't tell that deity shit. It's just like, I think deity is big and powerful is one of the other problems we have proving magic and spirituality. Because if someone says this deity is all powerful and all knowing, etc., then someone can immediately ask the question, okay, well then why don't they show up and do something? Usually the answer is something around the lines of, they don't just show up because you asked for them to prove themselves. But like, well, what do they show up for, and what do they look like whenever they show up? Often we're not really allowed to ask that question. We're not really allowed to examine, what does it look like when a deity shows up? What does it look like when spirituality is actually happening? How do we measure prayer? These questions sound very disrespectful. And I'm not saying that they aren't disrespectful, by the way, but they are scientific questions, and they're going to be asked. Just a moment. Once you want a phenomena to be recognized on the level of science, you have to let it be held up to a kind of testing vigor that is not something we usually think that religion is has to go through. I think that right now there's a very homogenized, easily digestible version of religion that everyone's kind of been given as a mainstream sort of thing. And most people aren't really familiar with religions where you have an initiation ceremony where there is actually a question of whether or not you will pass the initiation. Instead, most people have gone through things like, say, Catholic confirmation, where all you really have to do is go through some schooling, maybe memorize some prayers, look up a saint, and then sit through a ritual, eat some bread and drink some wine. I, by the way, I am a confirmed Catholic. That's why I can say that. It's an easy ritual. You cannot fail it. There is nobody at the confirmation ritual who will say, you there, you're not confirmed. I saw you twitch an eyeball wrong, and now you don't get to be confirmed. Like, it is a rubber stamp up to any sort of standard whatsoever. It's basically your behavior in Sunday school. And that's really more of a like social thing than it is a skill thing or any kind of actual skilled initiation. Whereas, say, an initiation at your first hunt, where you're not considered to be a hunter, and maybe it's as a coming of age thing too, where you're not considered to be an adult until you actually go out and hunt game and kill the game in like the right way, like, you know, you do all your hunting stuff right. Like, that's something that you are not guaranteed to pass the first time. That is a difficult thing. That involves risk. That involves a challenge. And those things are absent in the religion of today, because the religion of today needs to give you something as soon as you show up. It's, I'm going to say, very capitalistic in that you insert coin and you receive bacon. You you put in your quarter and you get your candy. You show up every time. Now, God typically doesn't do anything on schedule, doesn't show up for a schedule. The priest is there to show up on schedule. And the priest is kind of there to maintain God's flock. But after a while, the question has to be asked, when is it that God's showing up? What is it that God is actually trying to tell us? How can we tell when God is actually sending a message? I couldn't really tell you as a Catholic when God is actually sending a message to the Catholic Church. I could not tell you one time that the Pope had spoken with a Catholic priest in my life that I felt that they were actually touched by the spirit of something higher. And I know that sounds pretty sad. I also know that that sounds a bit more like Felix's experience than Linc's experience. And little bit of, I'm kind of all of him. So there's, if you consider someone to be all of a person's life once, then I'm kind of like that for Felix. So I can tap into that experience, especially because it is so spiritual. But there's other parts of Felix's life that I really couldn't tell you much of anything about, because I really wasn't there for that. You would call them very non-spiritual times or aspects of his life. It means that I have kind of a limited vantage point, but when it comes to religion, the vision's pretty clear. So there's no challenge in, say, Catholic confirmation other than a typical, it's a typical award ceremony at school. You sit through it. Since we don't really have that in our religion anymore, where do we have it in life? And I think this is why so many people are so stuck on their jobs doing work, is because the only time that we really get an opportunity to fail is also the only time that we get the opportunity to succeed, because the individual inside a person is always measuring the, hey, did I improve? What did I accomplish today? What did I really get today? What's the score? In the game of life, where am I now in comparison to where I was before? I noticed a bunch of causes. What are the effects from all of the new causes? I want to know how the logic progressed. Tell me more of the story. Update, 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 update. And over time, you want more and more of those updates. But if you're going to church, you're not really going to get updates. You're just going to get the same thing over and over again. Time is going to progress in terms of a holiday schedule, but nothing new is going to happen. Like if you've been in a premillennial dispensationalist church before, any kind of congregation who preaches kind of the rapture stuff, and you kind of wised up to it, then you know how this goes. The first 10 times that story seems really dire, but by the 11th time, it starts wearing thin. Like at some point, you do start to ask, okay, so when is the world going to end already? Like you said 10 years ago that in 5 years we were going to be seeing the end times, and now you're saying that in 5 years we're going to be seeing the end times, and it was 5 goalposts. Like progress tracker, the illusion of progress at all, but nothing ever really happens, and they know nothing's ever really going to happen. They know that they made this all up. But there are religious initiations, there are spiritual experiences that are real, that have real effects, that have real output. There is a real cause and a real effect. Looking at those and seeing what is the difference there, you might actually find something that you could measure. Now, that's just for spiritual and religious phenomena. I'm putting that out there because some of it's been happening for so many, say, hundreds or thousands of years, that you're no longer looking at any one individual's specific ability, and you're starting to look at a general population's abilities. One of the questions here has been, how do we measure the abilities of the psychic abilities of a human? Even the psychic abilities of an animal, if we want to get really vague and say that maybe psychic ability is just something that all animals have. And humans aren't actually special in having psychic ability. It's just that the way that they exhibit their psychic abilities is, of course, human in nature, because humans are human. Like oranges are orange and cats are cats. It's amazing how logic works sometimes. But it's really difficult to measure to a thorough degree any animal's psychic behavior besides a human's psychic behavior, because it's really hard to understand what's going on in the mind of anything but a human. So we're probably going to stick to humans for quite a while. If we manage to go beyond, that's great. I'd love to know more about cat magic, cat psychic stuff myself. I notice that they're quite astute, that they're quite able in terms of psychics. They are quite perceptive. They're quite reactive. But we'll see if we ever get anywhere with that. I hope I've put some thoughts into people's heads about where they could go with this. I don't have an answer or a solution for how this should go. I'm not the only person who's out there thinking about this. I know there's other people who think about, how do we prove magic? How do we prove psychic stuff? Why is it so difficult to do? Why is it so different from measuring any other thing? I want to mention, psi particles. At one point, people were thinking that psychic ability would be affected by psi particles, and I'd say look between maybe the 40s to 70s or 80s. The psi particles, I believe, were mentioned quite a lot in Russia. And so sometimes you have like some Iron Curtain business going on where stuff that went in Russia, nobody else besides the people, or Soviet, the USSR, stuff that was do in the USSR. And so just the fact that it was being done in the USSR meant that stigma attached to it. But for a while, there was some research being done on whether psychic energy, especially the energy that's generated by doing psychokinesis. Again, psychokinesis is more of a Russian thing, using the word psycho in front. I think they did more of, and PK, shortening psychokinesis to PK, is another Soviet thing. Calling it PK energy or PKE is also a Soviet thing. And yes, in Ghostbusters, the PKE meter is measuring PK energy and psychokinetic energy. That means psychic energy that is moving something. In fact, you could say that psychokinetic energy is the E in E equals mc squared. There's basically a question mark here. Is PKE equals mc squared? Or is PKE different? Now, I can't really say a whole lot here because I have not done a lot with psychokinesis on purpose. I have done a little bit of experimenting with psychokinesis, and I have not gotten anything consistent before. And I still have a lot of questions when it comes to the field of psychokinesis. I do have several books that mention the subject. I have one book that's entirely on psychokinesis. I think it's a 60s or 70s book, so I don't know if it really goes anywhere, that it actually, will contribute anything to the discussion. But at some point, I'm going to be going through that and bringing it to the channel. So I think that the question I'm trying to be something requires, how much energy something needs or generates or whatever. All of that is a measurement, and the measurement is there to see how efficient something is. Is it worth doing this to get the energy that it produces? And the energy that it produces, what do we do with that energy? What can we do with that energy? Well, first of all, how much of it is there? So the energy, that's a fundamental, it's a fundamental resource. And I don't think we really think about energy as a resource enough whenever we're talking about magic energy. Whenever we're talking about magic energy, we're talking about how to do a spell or a cause and effect or something like that. But I think that we should start thinking about it in terms of the way that we think about natural. If we're using energy, then what's the power station that generates the energy? How are we paying for that power that comes from the power station? What's the cost? If we want more power, then how much is that? Is it available? Are there different forms of power that we could be using? How are those available? How much do they cost? How do we pay for them? I just throwing that out there. I think that, and so a lot of times what people are trying to do is not figure out these types of questions. They're just trying to utilize their own abilities and then keep going, doing whatever it is they're trying to do. They're trying to usually achieve something specific. And after they've achieved that something specific, then, they're kind of done and they move on, unfortunately. And usually that's as much experiment as anybody does. I've found not ancient, but somewhat old writings, grimoire stuff, where they're looking at the instructions from the Goetia, and they're describing their attempts to summon demons from the Goetia as an experiment. Each time that they try something that's instructed in a grimoire, and they try to find out what happens whenever they do it, they call it, people who were doing this were in fact also scientists. I think were also scientists, that you didn't really get people who were mages only, that didn't also do chemistry or mathematics or something, until after royal courts, especially because your magician would also probably be your magician. If you ever look up how most of the more interesting magic tricks, card tricks especially, they all require a lot of math. You have to figure out a lot of odds, a lot of numbers. You have to do a lot of counting. You have to do a lot of math in your head. The more math you can do in your head, if you want to be a stage magician or any magician at all. And that's because a lot of this was invented by mathematicians. If you were a court mathematician, how the heck were you going to demonstrate your abilities whenever they weren't building something? Because if they were building something, you'd be like, yes, I have all the measurements. You can build it like this and it will not fall down. And then they build it and it doesn't fall down. Well, they're not always going to be doing that. So whenever they're not doing that, how do you prove that you're a good mathematician? You're going to have to show them a trick that they can't figure out. And they're going to be like, heck, I don't know how the heck you did that. Like, since I know that there's no way that you could have, done what it is that the illusion looks like it is that you did, then you must be a really great mathematician. So, proof's in the pudding there. It's a lot of stage magic devices you'll find are objects that you could have easily had sitting around if you were doing science, if you were doing chemistry, alchemy. A lot of tarot card stuff. If you look at the suits of the tarot cards, a lot of times they're called discs instead of pinnacles. Those discs would have been planetary discs. You actually would have had discs sitting around a lot to do certain measurements or to figure out certain things, to model out certain things. They were quite aware of the fact that the planets were spherical and they were going around each other, and it was all big dance in the cosmos. The big question was how and what was around that and where was it going. They knew quite a lot of the things that were happening in the local system. It was stuff beyond that was really, really strange. And also the distant gravitational effects of some objects were not really understood during certain time periods, but might have been understood during others. So geometry is a way of understanding the world around you, the sky, the stars, and it's a way of measuring things, modeling things in a way that becomes immediately apparent. E equals mc squared is a way of modeling mass onto a square area to give you an understanding of how much the destruction of that type of mass and that much mass would impact the environment around it, how much of the environment the explosion will reach. What I'm saying is not an exact recipe for doing what it is that I'm talking about. I'm more just giving you an idea of like how to imagine this on a kind of mathematical grid so that you can start understanding the actual measurement of energy that's happening. I want to emphasize that the explosion is a measurement of energy. It's a visual, it's a physical demonstration. It is a live in reality theatrical demonstration of how much energy that is. And everything that you see in that explosion, in that spectacle, in the rocket launch and everything is a demonstration of how much energy was behind something. And numbers are only one way of measuring and expressing energy. The explosion, the visual of the explosion, is another way of measuring and expressing how much energy it was and describing the energy and what its impact was and where it went, how long it stuck around. So when it comes to measuring or otherwise documenting magic and psychic ability, you've got quite a few options. I would say the important thing is consistency. Since magic is so unpredictable, spirits are so unpredictable, the universe itself is so unpredictable that the only way to really be able to track anything is to just keep filming and see what happens. Listen to what happens. Track that long enough, and there's something to measure. I don't really have a finale. I think that's pretty much it.